Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Data Platform Downunder, Session 2 for 2021. My name is Warwick Rudd, and I'll be your host along with my co-host, Martin Catherall. For today's session, we've got Alan White talking to us about finding so that you can fix those troublesome queries. I will be handing over to Alan very shortly so that he can continue or take us through today's session. A little bit of housekeeping for us. This session is being recorded and is being made available on the Data Platform YouTube channel. Now, at the moment, we haven't got the link on the slide deck, and that's because it's a generic link that is miles and miles long. We're hoping to get to the point that we can have our own specifically named channel, Data Platform Downunder. To do that, we need to be up and running for a month. We've only been up and running for a short period in time. And we also need to have 100 people subscribe to the channel to be able to get our own channel name. But once we've got all of those, it'll make it so much easier for you to come back and view all of these sessions that we are putting on for you this year. As I said, this is session 2. We've got another 15 sessions in the pipeline, 8 of which are scheduled between now and the end of June. So make sure that you come along and join us to continue your networking, where you get to talk to speakers and other like-minded people that you wouldn't normally get to speak with. Now, without taking up too much of Alan's time, I'll now hand over to Alan and we'll get this session rolling.
Thanks, Warwick. All right. Screen number 1. How do I like my Teams meeting? How do you like my Teams meeting?
There's your inbox.
My inbox?
Yes,
oh, that's
we're looking.
bad. Let me, did I pick the wrong screen? Hold on. That's inbox, other inbox. Ah, that's why I picked the wrong screen. All right. And do we have the slide deck?
We do.
Excellent. All right. Sorry about, I've never presented with Teams before. I use GoToMeeting a lot. So, all right. So originally I titled this Find and Fix Those Troublesome Queries. And when I got to the end of the session, I got comments saying, you showed us how to find them, but not how to fix them. And my answer was, yeah, that's a whole week-long session on how to fix them because there's so many things that can go wrong. So I'm focusing on the tools that you can use to find the problem queries that are causing performance issues on your systems. A little bit about me. I've been around for a very long time. I have my own consulting practice here in Cleveland, Ohio, in the USA. I've lived here my whole life, and I really do love Cleveland. I've visited Australia a couple of times. I love Australia, but I'm going to stay in Cleveland. I have been in IT since August of 1974, so gives you a little bit about how long I've been in and the kinds of changes I've seen in the industry. And I've basically had to retool my skills on an average of every 5 years throughout my career. So the fact that you're here, you're learning is a good thing. You can never stop. It really does continue to change. And I think that's a good thing. So I did cover multiple disciplines. I started out in computer operations, moved into development. I worked in telecommunications back when you had to use leased lines to communicate from one physical location to another. You had to lease a phone line from the telephone company, and they had special hardware that you had to purchase or lease from them to be able to make those connections. I specialized in that for a while, network design. And then in 1992, I discovered relational databases, and I went, that's where I want to be, right? So I continued along that path and working with SQL Server since 1992. the Sybase version until Microsoft SQL Server 6.0 came out in 1995, and then I just haven't looked back. Certifications, I spent a number of years as a certified trainer. I've been awarded the Microsoft MVP award for SQL Server / data platform for the past 14 years. And I was also director of PASS for 3 years from January of 16 through December of 2018. One of the most rewarding periods in my life was just becoming part of PASS, spending the time on the board of PASS, making things work so that other people could learn. Okay, enough about me. Let's get into our session. I first put up here the agenda. You've already read that, hopefully. We want to find the tools that we need to fix the problem queries, but we need to know what those problem queries are. The most important thing, I put this quote from Grant Fritchie. I love this quote. No magic will fix crap code. And it's absolutely true. And 99% of the performance problems you're going to find have to do with the code. So how do we find that code? First thing we do is we need to look at the behavior on the system. We see what's going on, capture performance metrics so we know specifically what's going on. If we don't capture a performance baseline, we can't possibly know what the problem is when the problem occurs. We have to guess, right? So capture performance of IO counts and runtime stats, what memory grants are being taken, those kinds of things. Capture what's going on the system. Look and find queries that you think are a problem, adjust them to reduce their resource use. I find regularly that queries will bring in millions of rows of data when with just a little tailoring, they'll bring in like 20,000 rows. Okay, whole lot of difference in the performance between those two. So you adjust that query to reduce the resource usage, then look at the behavior again. Repeat. It's just an ongoing process. And not only when you fix that query and you get it just right, you're not done. Why? Because data changes. You've got that data growing all of the time. So as that data grows, the method that the query processor is going to use to solve that query is going to change as well. So you're going to have to come back at it at some point in time. So anybody who says a DBA is a short-term job and it's going to go away, it's not going to happen. Okay. All right. The tools. There are some really excellent vendor tools available. I use them every day. Okay, they're outside of the scope of this talk. I don't want to get into vendor tools in this talk. I have my preferences. I know Warwick and Martin have their preferences. Talk to us individually. We can talk our preferences, but outside of the scope of today's talk. So the first thing we're going to get into is using Perfmon and Profiler. Simply because there's a neat feature that has not been upgraded to work with Management Studio / with extended events, I should say, whether it's Management Studio or Azure Data Studio, it hasn't been upgraded to work with extended events. So we still have to do trace to do this first thing. We're going to look at the activity monitor in Management Studio. We're also going to look at the performance dashboard report, which most people don't even know exists. We'll look at dynamic management objects. I'll call them DMVs all day long because that's what Microsoft first called them when they were introduced in SQL 2005. We'll look at extended events, look at the graphical query plan, and finish up with query store. So here we go. Perfmon and Profiler. So Perfmon allows you to capture performance counters. Interesting story about Perfmon. I was actually in Brisbane doing a presentation for the user group there. Gosh, this had to be in 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. And a gentleman introduced him, and I did a whole session on performance counters and capturing the data with PowerShell. And the gentleman introduced himself to me after the meeting and said, yeah, I'm the guy that wrote Perfmon. And I went, and I forgot to get his contact information. So if you happen to be in this session, please reach out. Let me know. I'd love to talk to you again. Thank you. Anyway, so we'll use Perfmon to capture the performance counters, and we're going to review those results live within Profiler. So we'll capture those Perfmon results to a log file, and then we're going to capture trace data, and Profiler allows us to join that trace data to the Perfmon data so that we can see the correlation between the performance counter data and the queries that are actually being run. Caveat, don't ever use Profiler to look at live performance, live activity on your server. Okay, the performance impact of doing that is significant. What I'm going to show you is how to do a server-side trace and then bring that trace data back into Profiler to look at it separately. Right. So let's take a look at that. Or can everybody see my demo screen?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and open up Profiler. You can create a server-side trace in Transact SQL, and we're going to. But there's a lot of code that you have to write to set up all of the events that you're going to capture. And I don't want to do that by myself. So I'm going to show you how to do it and let the tools create that for you. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new trace. I'm going to connect to my server. Let's call this Downunder. I'm going to use the T-SQL replay template. Both Profiler and I should say, trace/Profiler and extended events we'll look at in a little bit. They allow you to use templates which automatically select a number of events that they're going to capture. All right, the replay template captures enough events that you can, with the captured trace data, replay that workload at a later point in time. How have I used this in the past? At one point, I had to do performance comparisons between two different server architectures. And so what we did was I backed up the production database, started a server-side trace, captured a workload against that database, stopped it all, and then saved that trace data and the production backup, restored it to server A, replayed the workload, captured the performance characteristics, then restored the database to server B, run the workload capturing performance characteristics, and then compare those two. Right now, you know which server, because it's an apples to apples comparison. You know which server is better. That's what this was designed for. But it also captures all of the events you need to be able to join the Perfmon and Profiler data together. We need to run it just briefly, just long enough that we get the export script trace definition. If you don't run it, this menu option is not enabled. So we're going to script the trace definition for SQL 2005 to 2019. We're going to save this in our demos directory. We'll call it Downunder. It's been saved. I can close out of Perfmon. And I can now go into my demos directory. There's Downunder. I can drag it over here, and there's the file that was just created. Now, there's a couple changes we need to make. First of all, this max file size of 5, this is the size of the trace capture file, the maximum size in megabytes. I generally changes from 5 to 100 because 5 megabytes is just too small. And when it reaches this limit, it will go to a new file as long as we change this parameter from 0. If we leave it at 0, the trace will stop when it reaches that max file size. Change it to 2, it will roll over and create a new file and grow that one to 100 meg and then create a new file. It will keep going. So those are we need to make those changes. We also need, let me see if I created, I have my work done under, okay, good. I wanted to make sure I created my target directory. So I'm going to insert a directory for the file. And actually, this is the file name, so it's going to go into the work directory. In the file's name is going to be Downunder, and it will add the .trc extension to it. Okay, it provides that for you in the comment. Right. So these are all the changes we need to make, but we also need to go in and start up Perfmon. It's Windows Run. Nope, that's not it. Windows Run. There we go. I'm going to start up Perfmon. I'm going to close out of this because I don't really need the live capture. What I want to do is create a data collector set. And the data collector set then will run and send the results to my log file. So we don't have any user-defined data collector sets, so I want to create one. We'll create a new one. We'll call it Downunder. And it's going to ask what templates would you like to use. Now, I've already created a template, and it looks like this. It's an XML file called a data collector set. And what it allows you to do is to define the performance monitor counters that you want to capture. I've already defined these. These are a set of Perfmon counters that I typically capture whenever I'm doing a health check on a customer system. It's a smaller number of counters rather than the breadth of counters you'll find in a commercial package, but it's enough to give me a pretty good idea of what's going on the server and where the problems might be. I've provided this for you in the downloads. In fact, you can already download the deck and the demo scripts from my website, dataperfpro.com. If you go there, click on blog, the blog post at the top has a link that you can download the files, and this file is included there for you. So I'm going to load in. Oh, I closed. Let me do that again. Perfmon. I want to create a new data collector set, call it Downunder. We're going to browse to our demos folder with that health check template that I just showed you. And I want to put this in work Downunder. Run the default, run the data collector set as default and save and close, finish. All right, so now we have the Downunder data collector set, and we'll start that. So now you can see that it's running. It's going to the C work down under this subdirectory data collector.blg. So that's binary log file. Now we can start this trace. And you notice it returns trace ID 2. Now I'm going to run a set of queries that Atom Mechanic provided that are really, really ugly queries. Well, actually, there's like 3 really ugly queries followed by a query that's not so ugly, but it produces a key lookup, and I'm running it 10,000 times. That death by 1,000 cuts scenario that often escapes you to, why is my CPU so high? So this runs about, well, it just finished. So now we can go and stop this trace. How do we stop the trace? Much the same way we started it. Instead, we'll change this trace ID to the 2 that we see down below, and a 0 stops the trace, and a 2 removes the trace. When you're dealing with trace and profiler, a server-side trace is the least impactful way of capturing trace data. And a server-side trace is defined by running it from T-SQL like this and saving the data to a file on the physical server where you're running it. That's the least impactful way of running trace. And that's what I've done here. I'm going to stop, don't want to do it there. I'm going to stop this capture now. I'm done with the analysis that I want to do there. And now we can close out Perfmon. We can, yes, and we can go back in and open up Profiler. Instead of opening up a new trace, though, we're going to open a trace file. In our demos, now we put it into the work directory. And there's the Downunder. So here's the trace data that we captured. Now, because that trace was set up using the replay template, I have enabled this menu option, import performance data is enabled. So I can capture that. Here's the Perfmon log file, and it gives me the list of counters that I want to show. It captured all those counters that I showed you in the template, but we don't want to look at all of those all at the same time because the message gets rather confusing. So I do want to look at percent processor time, and I want to look at batch requests per second. Just let's keep it simple for now. I can always go back and add a different counter at a later time, but once I do that, I get this interesting graph. And if I click on the graph, well, let's click over here. Right here, we started up with the really ugly query. We've got other ugly queries. We hit this peak right here, and we're showing the key lookup query plans, where it's running 10,000 copies of that. So you see, by changing this, we can see what's going on, and it gets us, if it doesn't get us exactly onto the query we're running, it gets us really, really close, right? So we can correlate performance data with the queries that are running that may be causing those performance characteristics to take place. This is the only case where I still use server-side trace when I want to correlate this data. Aaron Stellato gets very angry with me for even showing this demo because she's a 100% extended events kind of person, and I get it, and but I love teasing her about it. So I'm ready to go back to the next section. So Warwick, are there any questions right now?
There's not from anybody in the audience, but I do have a question, given that you did bring up Aaron's name and the extended events versus profiling. Now, apart from the graph that you've just shown,
yes,
using Profiler, given Profiler was marked for no longer use and hasn't had any love since the release of 2012 when extended events came out. Outside of what you've just shown with that graph, would you still use that on newer versions of SQL Server?
Other than just what I did, no, I would not. And I'm going to actually come to that later in the presentation.
Okay.
All right.
No more questions.
Okay. I'm actually, Erin and I are going for a 4-hour hike on Sunday. So she lives about 20 minutes from here. All right, SSMS Activity Monitor. So in the early days of Management Studio, Activity Monitor was not a very good tool. And it was rather impactful on performance. So I didn't use it, and I didn't recommend anyone else use it. But in the later versions of Management Studio, the performance impact has reduced significantly, and it shows a lot more useful information, right? You can filter on session ID, or whether it's a user or system process. You can say, okay, only show me the activity for a particular database or a particular login, if you will. You can show resource weights. There's all kinds of filters that you can play with. It will show you heavy data I/O that might be going on. You can isolate what might be causing the performance issues on your server based on I/O. And also what I really like is the recent and active expensive queries. So let's take a look at that demo. It's easier to show you than to explain. So I don't need that anymore. I am going to start up a workload though. This is something little script that Jonathan Cahias wrote that just is just an ongoing workload, so you can see activity. And now I'm going to open up Activity Monitor. Now these graphs are interesting, but they don't show you any data until you open it up. So the lines that are starting right now, right here, those are the activity that started happening once I opened up Activity Monitor. But you can see the processes here, the list of processes. I can specify, let's just show me the system processes. If I think it might be a system process, usually it's a user process, which is a 1. If I can select all. I can show me just the activity by the service account that's running SQL Server, or just by the administrator, right? So I can specify which login. Only show me the activity going against 2008 R2, right? Which is the activity that I started up in this PowerShell window, right? So I have all of these abilities to filter what kind of command, what application. I want to get rid of some of my filters. So I have different applications, so I can just say, okay, what's coming from SQL management? Well, it's just this one, right? So I have that ability to get rid of the noise and focus in on what it is I'm specifically looking for. I can look at what's causing wait times. I've got right now there's not a lot of activity going on in the server, but logging is the biggest source of waits right now on my system. I did have some memory waits there for a short short moment there. There's some network I/O waits, but mostly it's logging on this minimally used system. I can look at the data file I/O. Now, again, there's not a lot going on. If I run my big query, now you can see some significant data I/O going on, right? In your environment, you're probably going to see a lot more. Recent expensive queries and active expensive queries. So because I'm running my big ugly queries here, it's showing me my active expensive query. I can look at the query text. I can here we'll do it. We'll do it this way. I can look at the I can see the execution plan of the queries from here. We're going to go into execution plans later, but the point is I can fairly quickly lock in on problem queries just using this recent or active expensive queries. I'm sure most of you have had the boss come to you like my client said to me today, and what's going on the server? Why is it running so slow? Right? Well, here are ways for you to actually see what's going on the server and tell why it might be running so slow. Any questions? I got there by right-clicking on the server name and selecting Activity Monitor.
No questions at this point, Alan.
Alrighty. Performance dashboard report. Now this was added in about like version 17.2 of Management Studio, and it was done very quietly. There wasn't a whole lot of fanfare about it, but it gives you graphs and it shows, showing you, weights and CPU utilization. It will give you current activity by whether user requests or user sessions, allows you to drill down based on what's going on your system. And again, it gives you information about those expensive queries that we talked about with Activity Monitor, but just using the report that's built into Management Studio. How do I get there? I go down to Reports, Standard Reports, Performance Dashboard. And now you see a graph just for the last 15 minutes or so, but you see that the CPU percent, the yellowish, orangish on the top is other processes besides SQL Server. Note that I'm running everything from within this virtual machine. So I'm running Management Studio and Profiler and Perfmon. So that accounts for a bunch of this CPU up top, but the blue is just SQL Server. What is SQL Server doing? So this gives me an idea of how busy my CPU is. Now I don't have any waiting requests, but I can look at history. And interestingly enough, the biggest process that's waiting on stuff is Query Store. But if I open that up, most of that is the async queue, and that doesn't have a lot of impact on my performance. So I don't worry too much about that. But of course, number of waits, parallelism is pretty high, both CX Packet and CX Computer. So I could do some work on trying to better allow SQL Server to parallelize more evenly. Number of waits, I've got a whole lot of memory waits, allocation, reserved memory allocation. So that probably has more to do with the fact that I started up the server and then started running queries. So that's probably from just filling the buffer cache, right? Along a long-running server is going to have a different weight characteristic than I have here. But I can look at latches, right? This is the buffer pool, mostly. I haven't seen much difference from this, but I tend to pick most expensive queries by CPU, and you notice number one is that query that's got that key lookup issue, and that coincides with my understanding that key lookups are generally bad for CPU, right? If I look at number two, it's one of the ugly queries, right? Where I've got subqueries and all kinds of fun issues. Number three is this really big, ugly query, right? So this is just another way, without using the activity monitor, run this, and it will use the internals of SQL Server and bring back to you those problem queries so you can investigate what's going on, how can you fix them, make them better. But I encourage you to, explore this, check it out. It's there, it's available to you. You don't have to buy anything. It's just there. So, any questions on that?
So, Alan, with regards to the performance dashboard report,
yes, sir.
How accurate is the report from a CPU point of view? We've noticed at work it doesn't quite report accurate CPU.
I have not asked that question of the team. So my guess is that it's bringing this information back from DMVs. So it's as accurate as those DMVs can report for whatever reason.
Okay.
I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for. I don't have a better one.
And it could possibly, well, what about depending on the version that you're running?
Okay. I honestly, I haven't done any research into that. So I'm going to ask you, Warwick, have you been looking into this, and what have been your experiences with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't used the dashboard in such a long time. My thinking was just around with the advances on the CPU collections for the DMVs and the DMFs to pull that information on the later versions of SQL Server. We've got better information being captured, etc. So whether it's possibly also the frequency that it's being captured that may or may not show just like you would if you were looking at Performance Monitor.
Uh-huh.
Martha, does that give some food for thought?
Alan, I have a question.
Sure.
The first point that you talked about joining the profiler and the Perfmon, and you could find out the particular query that's not performing well. And here as well, in the performance dashboard, you get the similar result. Now, I know that the first slide that gave a more information than the dashboard. I mean, from an administrator point of view, performance dashboard, that's much faster, much quicker to give you the result, but which query is not performing well. So, I mean, I won't be bothered to go for, doing the join of the, Perfmon and versus, the profiler. So what is your suggestion on that. Why would I do that?
Sometimes the most expensive query is not the one necessarily the one that is causing the how do I
I mean, dashboard is much quicker.
The dashboard is much, yeah, absolutely true.
I mean, instantaneously, I know something is my system is not performing. Okay, I know the
Sure.
product systems. I have worked
Sure.
on coincident health and supporting, the tier 1 systems. Something, some particular query or particular time.
Right. But let's say, for example, that the problem that you're trying to solve isn't necessarily tuning the most expensive query, but you're trying to isolate a network capture problem, right? So the performance dashboard isn't going to tell you when you've got network latency, whereas capturing the performance counters and linking the performance counter data with the queries that are run at that time is much more likely to allow you to drill into. So I chose CPU percent and batch requests per second when I was showing the Perfmon and profiler data together. If I chose a network latency counter, that would show me a completely different characteristic, wouldn't it?
I think the both answers depends on the situation.
Well, yes, of course it does.
Yeah.
But if your focus is on something that's not necessarily the expensive queries,
something is happening continuously. If system is performing, is not performing well for a longer time, then definitely capture those performance data and other things. And something immediately I found my system is suddenly misbehaving it. So then I will go immediately jump onto the performance dashboard and find out what's really happening. So these are the two different scenarios.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, let's go back. Let's look a little bit at the DMVs themselves, the dynamic management objects. They're fairly straightforward in understanding what each object covers. So the transactional type objects, DM trend locks, active transactions, database transactions, all start with the DM underscore tran. Things relating to indexes, DMDB index, and then usage stats, operational stats, physical stats. Missing index, it tells you right that there in the name, it's DB missing index. Query stats, this allows you to get the query stats and the query plans directly in your queries. Now, there is a really good book that was written a while back, and it's free, written by Lewis Davidson and Tim Ford. And let me close this. I've got a link to it here. So if you go to my website and download the deck and demo scripts, you'll have this link. It's Performance Tuning with SQL Server Dynamic Management Views. And these examples come directly from Lewis and Tim's book. The first one, I'm going to use DMOS weight stats because I want to see what are my processes that are weighting the most. What are my top weight stats? I'm going to exclude weight types that don't matter. All right, and in fact, if you go to Glenn Berry's website, his list of weight types that don't matter is rather large. I'm staying with the list that came with Lewis and Tim's book. But what am I waiting mostly for? Request for deadlock search, dirty page pull, file stream IO completion, etc. These are the wait times that are based on the activity that I've got going on this server right now. So instead of using that dashboard report with its weights, I can go directly to the DMV and get that information. If I wanted to get a query plan for activity that's in my plan cache based on the activity that's going on, I can join query stats with the function, the exec text query plan function, exec query plan function, and the SQL text function. Run those together, and here are the queries that are running on my system. Right? Here's the query plan for the whole batch. Here's the query plan. Oh, it's still running. Sorry. Here's the query plan for the individual statement. Right? So pulling right out of the DMVs, I can bring back those query plans. In fact, if you're using Atom Mechanics SP who is active, this is exactly how he brings back those query plans for you so that you can easily see what's going on your system and look at the query plan that's causing that performance. Right? If I wanted to find CPU intensive queries, I can look at exec query stats and bring back the SQL text and order it in descending order by total worker time. I'm just going to bring back the top 3, and you notice it's, well, 2 of the 3 are from my sample set. This third one, not sure what that's from, probably one of the tools that I've been running. But this top one, of course, is my query with the key lookup. And that's just by looking at total worker time. In addition, you can isolate what locks are being held under certain circumstances. So I'm going to begin a transaction. I'm going to update this product category table and change the name of the category. But I'm going to leave that transaction open. So now I've got that open transaction. I can select from DM trend locks and see what locks are actually in place. So I've got exclusive lock on the product category. I've got all these locks in the product category, and then shared schema lock on metadata. So these are the actual locks that were necessary for this update to take place. Now, if I roll back that transaction and run that query again, there aren't any. So the point is that all these tools, be it Activity Monitor, be it Performance Dashboard, all use these DMVs to get you the information that you're looking for. You can tailor your own queries using those DMVs directly. And I strongly recommend you download and check out the details in Lewis and Tim's book. Okay. Questions?
No, this time, Alan, and I've put the link in the chat window.
Oh, thank you. All right. Extended events. You all wanted to go to extended events. Extended events was first introduced in SQL 2008, but in a limited way. It was SQL 2012 when they kind of went full blown with extended events. What I showed you earlier, that trace, that remains fixed at only 180 events. They're never going to add any more to that. I'm running in this demo SQL 2017. It supports over 1,500 events. SQL 2019 supports even more than that. My clients are running SQL 2017 pretty exclusively right now, so I haven't looked into 2019 too much. But the benefits, there's a lot of benefits to using extended events as opposed to trace. First of all, trace captures everything, and then when you have a filter, it filters that after it's captured, right? It says, oh, I've got this, but I only wanted information for the AdventureWorks database, so I'm going to throw out all this other stuff that I've captured, right? It's a rather inefficient way of doing things. It's kind of after things have happened, it takes a look, whereas extended events, there are hooks built into the SQL operating system. And so when you specify filters in extended events, if it's not something that you want to capture, it doesn't capture it at all. So it's far more lightweight, right? When I said earlier, don't ever run Profiler and watch live performance data, there's no reason not to watch live data. If that's useful to you, there's no reason not to do that with extended events. So let's take a look at extended events. I have got a workload here. I've got that workload going, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to Management, Extended Events. I'm going to create a new session. I'm going to call that session Downunder. In this case, I'm going to use the tuning template. The tuning template is when I'm actually doing performance tuning and I want to capture information, the tuning template generally has the events that I'm looking for. I don't need to know the start event and the stop event. I just need to know when it's done, what did it do? I am going to say start the session immediately after session creation and watch the live data on the screen as it's captured. The next thing I'm going to go into, I'm going to look at the events, and here are the 3 events that it's going to capture based on using the tuning template. Now, why did I highlight them? Because I want to do one more thing. I want to filter. I only want to capture when the database name is AdventureWorks. So I'm going to select the field is SQL Server.database name equals AdventureWorks. I need to add a target. I need to tell it where to go, just like I did the trace file, right? So I'm going to say go to a file. Now here it defaults the maximum file size is 1 gig. That's plenty. I don't need more than that. So I've selected everything I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and start. You notice there's nothing going on there. So let's go and run our fun queries again. And now you start to see activity. By default, it will come up with name and timestamp, and that's it up top. But you notice all the other fields that are available are down below. So I can right click on that and say show column and table. Now I've got the batch text. Or I could use choose columns, because in addition to batch text, I also want the database name, I want the duration, I want the logical reads. Let's move those over. So now I have that information as well. Now that query is done, right? But I've got all of this information. If I go back up to the top, you see it captured the batch text You can see the duration, the number of logical reads. I can sort. Oh, I need to stop the session. Sorry. Stop that session. Now that I've done that, I can sort on individual columns. So I can see what is my most logical reads, the maximum duration. Right? I brought in database name. You notice there is nothing in here. I've got all this activity going on, but that's going against the AdventureWorks 2008 R2 database. So my extended events section did not capture that at all. I was able to watch the queries going on while they were going on. I was able to add columns. Once this session finished, now I can sort and I can drill into where my performance problems might exist, right? There is a link at the end of the deck that links you to a YouTube video that Grant Fritchie did. That's about a 7-minute video where he goes into even more depth into what you can do with this live data window that can help you find the performance problems that you've got, right? You can do aggregations. There's all kinds of great things that you can do here. So I highly recommend you check that out. The link is in the deck at the end. Questions?
Not at this stage, Alan.
Okie doke. Graphical query plan. Now I've been showing you graphical query plans, but I just wanted to talk about them just a little bit. You know, it's the details of the steps that the query processor is going to take. It shows you roughly the amount of data that it's working with at each step. One important thing to remember: actual plans are the estimated plan with runtime statistics. So don't get hung up on, is this an actual plan or an estimated plan? They're the same thing. It's just the actual plan has the statistics. So let's take a quick look. And you know what I can do here. I'm going to highlight this whole thing. Man, this is ugly. And yes, I have to deal with queries like this every day at my client sites. Now, there's that whole conversation about, do you read right to left or left to right? SQL Server says, okay, I've got this select. What do I need to do to satisfy the select? Well, I need this scalar operation. That scalar needs this sort operation. That sort needs this nested loop to join together. Yeah, okay. I always start from the right because that's the source of the data. Right, so I've got an index scan and an index seek, and those are joined together via a nested loop. And then I'm going to do this index scan and have another index nested loop. SQL Server is going through a lot of work to satisfy that massive query. And this process allows you to understand what decisions the query processor made as to the best way to satisfy that query. I will ask you to take a look when you have time at the XML version of the plan. There's a lot of information in this XML version that isn't in the graphical version that you see here. Now you can hover over an operator. There's lots of information there for you with respect to, you know, estimated operator cost, the IO cost, the subtree cost. Here I've got number of executions and estimated rows per execution. This becomes important because sometimes you end up with multiple executions, and people say, well, look at the thickness of the line. Well, it's useful as a general guide, but the amount of data that you're pushing through is going to help you understand where SQL Server is doing most of the work. Hugo Cornelis has put together a website, and I'll tell you what it is when we get to the resources at the end of the session. I've got a link to it at the end of the session, but he's gone into very, very intricate detail on the query plan, on all of the operators, what they mean, and he's even got some introductory classes for free on his website that'll teach you how to read query plans and what they mean. Plus, he's got more advanced classes that you can purchase. So I highly recommend looking at Hugo's website. I think it's SQLServerFast.com, but it's on the resources deck at the end of the resources slide at the end of the deck. But again, it's important that you know how to use the query plan to start working on tuning those queries. Lastly, Query Store. Query Store was introduced in SQL Server 2016 SP1, and it literally is a flight data recorder for all of your queries. You need to enable it in each database. The data that it collects is stored in the database where you've enabled, right? So if you back up that database and restore it on another server, you have all of that historical data associated with the queries that were run there. So you can take a production database, restore it on another server, and then start playing, exploring through the queries to find your most expensive queries or regressed queries or all kinds of things, right? So it's extremely useful in that. And if you have access to the sessions from the past virtual summit that took place in November, Aaron Stellato did a session on best practices and best settings, what you should ideally set your servers to get the best performance and the best results out of Query Store. Highly recommend that session, right? But it does capture both your plan store and your runtime stats store for the queries that are actively running on your server. So let's take a quick look. I've enabled Query Store in my AdventureWorks database, and because I've enabled it, this Query Store item appears in Object Explorer. And I'm just going to go to top resource consuming queries. And if you notice, the top resource consuming query is my key lookup, right? I've run it like 30,000 times. It shows you right there on the execution count, right? Because every time I run my script, it runs this query 10,000 times. Next after that is one of the ugly queries. Next after that, another ugly query. So you can look at the various queries. Now we've got a single plan ID. Here's kind of a neat feature. I'm going to create a covering index. And then I'm going to close this execution plan. I'm just going to run that last set of queries. So what I'm doing is I'm running this 10,000 times. Now I'm selecting into a temp table, and then I'm dropping that temp table, right? So So it ran 19 seconds. But now if I go into and refresh my top queries, well, this is still my top resource consuming query, but you notice I've got another query plan here. If I click on that query plan, all of a sudden I have a new plan for that same query. Why? Because I created that covering index and the query didn't have to use a key lookup anymore. I can select this option. I can force that query plan to be used. I'm going to say no here, because if I drop that index, it obviously can't continue to use that query plan. But in your top resource consuming queries, if there are multiple plans, you can see the different plans and what their resource usage is. So this is just one of the features of Query Store that's available to you. You've got regress queries, overall resource consumption, all kinds of reports here that are built into Management Studio for you to use that Query Store data to identify the queries that you need to give your attention to. Any questions?
Not at this stage.
Oh, no? Okay. We're at the end, and this was really an overview session. I just wanted to give you a set of tools that you can then explore further to help you find and fix those queries. So this top reference up here is a book called Mastering SQL Server Profiler by Brad McGehee. Now it's a bit out of date. I think he wrote it in 2008, somewhere around there. But there's a chapter in the book that describes that process of joining the Perfmon and Profiler data, trace data together in Profiler. So that's the principal reason I included this book, because he describes it in detail, how to go about and do that. Grant Fritchie's book on SQL Server execution plans, highly recommended. And again, it's free download from Redgate. The extended events live data window, here's the link to YouTube to go ahead and watch that. It really does benefit. There's so much that Jonathan gets into. I'm sorry, that Grant gets into in that. I'm looking at Jonathan's name on my screen here. Jonathan and Aaron Stellato wrote a number of blog posts on extended events on the SQL Skills website. Check those out. And of course, Aaron Stellato's Query Store blog posts. Outside of Microsoft, I think Aaron knows more about Query Store than anybody else in the world. So, and yes, I get to spend 4 hours with her on Sunday. I look forward to that. Aaron is just a wonderful, wonderful person. So I'm looking forward to that. Lewis Davidson and Tim Ford's book, Performance Tuning with SQL Server Dynamic Management Views. It's actually views and functions, but download the scripts, because there may be just some tweaking you'll want to do to some of those queries to get back the data that is most suitable to your needs. And then the last one is the SQLServerFast.com/EPR, the execution plan reference. This is by Hugo Cornelis, and it's a brilliant website. Anything you want to know about execution plans, Hugo covers. And if you have a question, ask him. He's got an email reference there. Send him an email. He's more than happy to answer any questions you might have. With that, I'm going to wrap up.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everybody,
Absolutely.
for coming along, being part of today's session. Some of the links have been placed into the chat window if you haven't already picked those up and grabbed a hold of them. The main one that you want to have is the link straight to Alan's site, DataPerf Professionals, where you'll be able to access these downloads, the slide deck and the associated demo scripts. From there, you'll be able to get everything else. We have got a couple of minutes. If you have got any questions, put your hand up and you'll be able to ask Alan your questions directly. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel, so where you can come back and rewatch this session and all other sessions that we will have throughout the year. Just so that you're aware, for next month, the 3 sessions that we've got lined up and scheduled, we've got Secrets of Storing Blobs in a Database with Dennis Torres. We've got Tips to Monitor Your Azure SQL Database with Annapurna Natarajan. And we've got Let's Create a Data Analysis using Azure Automated Machine Learning with Vitor Fava. So we have got a couple of questions that we will ask, or more comments. Alan, I'm sure you're able to see those coming through at the moment.
Yes, thank you.
So with that, if you don't have any questions, thank you all. And I do look forward to seeing you in the next month for the 3 sessions that we have got. If you do have any questions, feel free to shoot them through. And if you haven't got Alan's details, I can forward them on to Alan so that he can answer your questions for you. Presentation. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Warwick.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Warwick.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you,
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.